Welcome back to Science Lullaby, where we explore the wonders of our natural world in a way that both educates and soothes. Tonight we're diving deep beneath the waves to encounter one of Earth's most extraordinary minds. Not a human mind, but something equally remarkable in its own right. We're going to spend the next few hours exploring the intelligence of killer whales, those magnificent black and white giants that patrol every ocean on our planet. These remarkable creatures, scientifically known as orca, are actually the largest members of the dolphin family, though their common name of killer whale has stuck throughout history. They can grow up to 32 feet long, weigh as much as 10 tons, and swim at speeds reaching 34 miles per hour. Their distinctive black and white coloration makes them instantly recognizable, with each individual bearing unique markings, particularly in the saddle patch behind their dorsal fin, allowing researchers to identify and track specific whales across their lifetimes. Killer whales are found in every ocean on Earth, from the frigid waters of the Arctic and Antarctic to temperate and even tropical seas. They're truly cosmopolitan, one of the most widely distributed marine mammals, and this glacial presence has allowed them to develop remarkable diversity in how they live, what they eat, and how they organize their societies. In some ways, different populations of killer whales are as culturally distinct from each other as different human cultures are from one another, a fact we'll explore in depth as our journey continues. As you settle in for sleep tonight, let the gentle rhythm of this exploration wash over you like ocean waves lapping at a shore. We'll journey through the latest scientific discoveries about orca cognition, their complex cultures, their sophisticated hunting techniques, and the depths of their emotional lives. What we've learned about these animals in recent years has fundamentally changed how we understand intelligence itself, challenging our assumptions about what it means to think, to feel, to learn, and to create culture. We'll encounter brain structures that suggest emotional sophistication surpassing our own, behaviors that can only be described as genuine teaching, and problem-solving abilities that demonstrate true creativity. The story we're about to tell unfolds across multiple continents, in laboratories where scientists peer into orca brains using advanced imaging technology, in coastal waters where researchers spend decades observing the same family groups, and in the remote reaches of Antarctic waters, where some of the most sophisticated hunting behaviors on Earth take place. It's a story built on patient observation, careful experimentation, and the gradual accumulation of evidence that has transformed our understanding of what non-human animals are capable of achieving. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and prepare to be amazed by creatures whose intelligence may rival our own in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let the science carry you away into peaceful sleep, as we uncover why killer whales are so much smarter than we ever imagined. This is a journey that will take us from the cellular level, examining specialized neurons in orca brains, to the population level, observing how distinct cultures emerge and persist across generations. Along the way, you'll discover why scientists now use words like culture, language, teaching, and even grief to describe killer whale behavior, terms once reserved exclusively for humans and our closest primate relative. For centuries, humans have considered ourselves the measure of all intelligence. We've built civilizations, written symphonies, and sent spacecraft to distant worlds. But beneath the ocean's surface, another form of intelligence has been evolving for millions of years, developing in ways we're only now beginning to comprehend. When scientists first began studying killer whales seriously in the mid-20th century, they recognized that these animals were intelligent. How could they not be? Orcas displayed obvious problem-solving abilities, complex social structures, and sophisticated hunting techniques. But the true depth of their cognitive capabilities remained hidden beneath the waves, obscured by the challenges of studying wild animals in the vast ocean, and by our own limited understanding of what intelligence could look like in a brain so fundamentally different from our own. The breakthrough came gradually, through decades of patient observation and increasingly sophisticated research methods. Scientists like neuroscientist Lori Marinio began examining orca brains using magnetic resonance imaging technology, revealing structures that would fundamentally challenge our understanding of animal cognition. Field researchers spent thousands of hours documenting orca behavior in the wild, slowly piecing together the complex cultures these animals had developed over countless generations. And as the evidence accumulated, a startling picture emerged. These weren't just smart animals in the way we typically think about animal intelligence. Orcas possessed cognitive capabilities that in many ways paralleled and even exceeded those of the great apes, our closest living relatives. Consider what intelligence actually means. In humans, we tend to focus on problem solving, language, tool use, abstract thinking, and the ability to learn and transmit culture. We value creativity, emotional depth, self-awareness, and the capacity to imagine futures and plan accordingly. By every one of these measures, killer whales demonstrate remarkable capabilities. They solve novel problems with creativity and flexibility. They possess complex communication systems with distinct dialects that are passed down through generations. While they don't use tools in the way primates do with their hands, they use water itself as a tool, manipulating waves and currents to achieve their hunting objectives. They learn from each other and teach their young, creating distinct cultural traditions that define entire populations. They display emotional complexity that scientists now believe may even exceed human emotional depth, and they demonstrate self-awareness, recognizing themselves as individuals within a larger social context. But here's what makes orca intelligence particularly fascinating from a scientific perspective. Their cognitive sophistication evolved entirely independently from primate intelligence. The last common ancestor of killer whales and humans lived more than 90 million years ago, long before the first primates appeared. This means that the intelligence we see in orcas represents a completely parallel evolution of advanced cognition. Nature, it seems, found multiple pathways to developing sophisticated minds. And by studying these different paths, we learn not just about orcas, but about the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. The ocean presents unique challenges and opportunities that shaped orca intelligence in distinctive ways. Living in a three-dimensional fluid environment where sound travels differently than in air, where visibility can be limited, and where prey can be incredibly diverse required the evolution of different sensory systems and different ways of processing information. Orcas developed biological sonar capabilities that allow them to see with sound, creating detailed mental images of their environment. Through they evolved the ability to process vast amounts of acoustic information, distinguishing between different prey species based on subtle differences in the echoes returned from their sonar clicks. The social demands of orca life also drove cognitive evolution in unique directions. These animals live in stable, multi-generational family groups, where relationships can last entire lifetimes. Success in hunting often depends on sophisticated cooperation between pod members, requiring the ability to anticipate others' actions, communicate complex intentions, and coordinate movements with precision. Young orcas must learn intricate hunting techniques that take years to master, techniques that vary from one population to another, based on local conditions and cultural tradition. All of this created evolutionary pressure for larger, more complex brains, capable of social learning, cultural transmission, and flexible thinking. Today's researchers use the term convergent evolution to describe how orcas and primates independently evolved, similar cognitive capability. Just as bats and birds independently evolved flight using different anatomical solutions, orcas and primates independently evolved advanced intelligence using different neural architecture. This convergence suggests that certain environmental and social conditions reliably produce complex cognition, regardless of the evolutionary starting point. It tells us that intelligence isn't a unique quirk of human evolution, but rather a predictable outcome when certain conditions are met: challenging environments, complex social structures, and long lifespans that allow for extended learning periods. The question we're exploring tonight isn't whether killer whales are intelligent. The scientific evidence for their cognitive sophistication is now overwhelming. Instead, we're asking a more profound question. In what ways are killer whales intelligent? How does their intelligence differ from ours? What can we learn about the nature of mind by studying a form of intelligence that evolved independently in an alien environment? And what does their remarkable cognitive sophistication mean for how we should view them and interact with them? As we journey through the evidence, you'll encounter stories of orcas displaying creativity, solving complex problems, experiencing deep emotions, creating and maintaining distinct cultures, teaching their young with remarkable patience, and adapting to changing circumstances with flexibility and innovation. You'll learn about brain structures that suggest emotional lives potentially richer than our own. You'll discover hunting techniques so sophisticated they require years of practice to master, and can only be described as genuine cultural traditions, passed down through teaching and learning rather than instinct. The story of orca intelligence is ultimately a story about expanding our understanding of what minds can be. It challenges us to look beyond our own experience and recognize intelligence in forms that may seem alien but are no less real. It invites us to see the ocean not as an empty realm of mindless creatures, but as home to societies and cultures as rich and complex as our own, just expressed in different ways. So let's begin this exploration by looking at the foundation of orca intelligence, the remarkable brain that makes all of this possible. Inside the skull of every killer whale lies one of the most extraordinary organs in the animal kingdom. An orca's brain is not just large, it's massive, weighing up to 15 pounds, and ranking as the second largest brain among all ocean mammals, surpassed only by the sperm whale. But size alone tells only part of the story. What makes the orca brain truly remarkable is its structure, its organization, and the unique features that appear designed for processing experiences and emotions at a level that may exceed even our own human capabilities. When neuroscientist Lori Marino and her team first examined killer whale brains using magnetic resonance imaging, they discovered something that would fundamentally change how we think about these animals. The brain wasn't just large, it possessed a level of structural complexity that rivaled and in some ways exceeded that of the human brain. The cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain associated with higher-level thinking, was extraordinarily convoluted, with deep folds and grooves creating a vast surface area packed with neurons. This high degree of what scientists call gyrification is a hallmark of intelligence, allowing more neural processing power to be packed into a confined space. To understand why gyrification matters, imagine trying to fit a large piece of paper into a small box. If you crumple the paper, you can fit more of it in the same space. The brain does something similar, folding its surface to create more cortical area within the confines of the human brain is highly gyrified, with elaborate folding that creates a cortical surface area of about 2 square feet. despite the brain itself being roughly the size of 2 fists. The killer whale brain takes this even further, with a gyrification index, a measure of how folded the brain's surface is, that exceeds that of humans and even approaches the level seen in the common dolphin, which holds the record for gyrification among mammals. But the real revelation came when researchers examined specific regions of the orca brain more closely. They discovered an elaboration of the limbic system, the collection of brain structures involved in emotions, memory, and motivation, that was unlike anything seen in other mammals. The orca's limbic lobe had actually evolved an additional region, called the paralimbic lobe, that sits adjacent to the standard limbic structures found in other mammals. This paralimbic region is so well developed in killer whales that it essentially represents a fourth lobe of the brain, something unique to cetaceans. In most mammals, including humans, the limbic system consists of several interconnected structures. The amygdala, involved in processing emotions, particularly fear and aggression. The hippocampus, crucial for forming new memories and spatial navigation. The hypothalamus, which regulates basic drives like hunger, thirst, and reproduction. And the cingulate cortex, which connects emotional processing to decision-making and behavior. In killer whales, all of these structures are present and well developed, but there's an additional elaboration, an entire paralimbic region that has no direct equivalent in the human brain. What does this expanded limbic system tell us? In mammals, the limbic system is the emotional center of the brain. It's where we process feelings like joy, fear, love, and grief. It's intimately involved in forming memories, especially those tied to emotional experience. It helps motivate behavior and plays a crucial role in social bonding. The fact that orcas have not just a well-developed limbic system but an entire additional region dedicated to these functions suggests something profound. These animals may possess an emotional complexity that matches or even surpasses our own. This hypothesis is further supported by the discovery of specialized neurons called spindle cells, or Vanicanomo neurons, in the orca brain. These distinctive cells were first identified in human brains in 1929 and were long thought to be unique to great apes and humans. Spindle cells are associated with some of our most sophisticated emotional and social capabilities: empathy, intuition, self-awareness, and what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that others have mental states different from our own. When spindle cells were discovered in killer whale brains in 2006, it was a revelation. But here's what made it even more remarkable. Killer whales don't just have spindle cells, they have them in greater relative numbers than humans. The anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region rich in these specialized neurons, is more elaborated in orcas than in humans. This suggests that whatever functions spindle cells serve, functions related to social cognition, empathy, and emotional processing, they may be even more important to orcas than they are to us. Think about what this means for a moment. The very neurons that we associate with our most sophisticated emotional and social capabilities, the cells that help us empathize with others, navigate complex social relationships, and experience rich emotional lives, are more abundant in the orca brain than in our own. This isn't speculation or anthropomorphism, it's observable neuroanatomy, the physical structure of the brain itself. The orca brain also shows remarkable specialization in regions related to sound process. The insular cortex, involved in auditory processing, and the temporal lobe, where sound is interpreted and language is processed in humans, are exceptionally well developed. This makes sense for an animal living in an acoustic world where sound is the primary sense, but it also suggests sophisticated capabilities for communication and social coordination through vocalization. Interestingly, the operculum, a brain region involved in speech production in humans, is also elaborated in orcas. While orcas obviously don't speak human languages, they produce complex vocalizations using their phonic lips, structures in their nasal passages that vibrate to create sound. Some researchers have suggested that the elaborated operculum in killer whales serves a similar function to the speech-related operculum in humans, controlling the precise production of their diverse vocal repertoire. One might expect that a brain this large and complex would require massive amounts of energy to maintain, and indeed brain tissue is metabolically expensive, but orcas have adapted to meet these demands. Their diet of fish and marine mammals rich in fats and proteins provides the energy necessary to fuel their enormous brains. Their efficient swimming allows them to travel vast distances without expending excessive energy, and their cooperative hunting strategies mean they can access prey that individual animals might not be able to catch alone, increasing the overall energy available to the pod. The ratio of brain weight to body weight, called the encephalization quotient or EQ, provides a rough measure of intelligence across different species. Humans have an EQ of about 7, meaning our brains are 7 times larger than would be expected for a mammal of our body size. Killer whales have an EQ of about 2.5, similar to chimpanzees. While this is significantly lower than humans, it's still quite high, especially for an animal of their size. And importantly, some researchers believe that EQ seriously underestimates the intelligence of large-brained marine mammals. The relationship between brain size and body size may work differently in cetaceans than in terrestrial mammals, meaning orcas might be even more intelligent than their EQ suggests. Another fascinating feature of the orca brain relates to memory and navigation. While the hippocampus, a brain structure crucial for memory in most mammals, is proportionally smaller in orcas than in many other species, this reduction appears to be compensated by the enlargement of other brain regions, particularly the entorhinal cortex and the cerebellum. Rather than losing memory capabilities, orcas seem to have redistributed these functions to different neural structures, possibly as an adaptation to their unique lifestyle and environmental demand. The cerebellum, traditionally associated with motor control and coordination, is particularly well developed in killer whales. This makes sense for animals that must coordinate complex movements in a three-dimensional fluid environment, but recent research suggests the cerebellum may play a broader role in cognition than previously thought, potentially contributing to social cognition and language processing as well. When you put all of these features together, what emerges is a picture of a brain that's not just large, but highly specialized for a life that demands sophisticated social cognition, complex communication, long-term memory, emotional depth, and flexible thinking. It's a brain capable of processing vast amounts of acoustic information, maintaining detailed mental maps of large ocean territory, recognizing individual pod members by their unique vocalizations, remembering hunting techniques learned years ago, and navigating intricate social relationships within multi-generational family groups. But here's perhaps the most important point. The orca brain represents an independent solution to the problem of creating advanced intelligence. While convergent evolution has produced some similar features, like spindle cells and elaborate limbic systems, the overall architecture of the orca brain is distinctly different from the primate brain. This tells us that there's no single blueprint for intelligence. Nature has found multiple ways to create minds capable of complex thought, rich emotional experience, cultural learning, and sophisticated social coordination. The implications are profound. If intelligence can evolve independently in such different forms, it suggests that the capacity for advanced cognition may be more common in the universe than we might think. Wherever conditions favor large brains, long lifespans, complex social structures, and varied environments, intelligence might emerge. The orca brain shows us that minds can be built in radically different ways, while still achieving similar levels of sophistication. As we continue our journey through orca intelligence, keep this remarkable organ in mind. Every behavior we'll explore, every cultural tradition, every sophisticated hunting technique, every display of emotion or creativity, is ultimately made possible by this extraordinary brain. It's the biological foundation for all the cognitive marvels we're about to encounter. One of the most profound discoveries about killer whale intelligence is that they possess culture. Genuine culture in the scientific sense of the term. When scientists talk about animal culture, they're referring to behaviors that are learned socially and passed down through generations. Behaviors that differ between populations not because of genetic differences or environmental factors, but because of information transmission through teaching and learning. By this rigorous definition, killer whales are one of the most cultural species on Earth, with distinct populations displaying remarkably different traditions that define their identities as surely as human cultures are defined by their unique customs and practices. The first hints of orca culture came from studies of vocalizations in the coastal waters of British Columbia on Washington State. Researchers discovered that different groups of killer whales living in overlapping ranges where they could easily interact, nevertheless maintained completely distinct vocal repertoires. These weren't subtle differences. The calls of different clans were as different as Greek is from Russian, distinct linguistic traditions maintained with remarkable fidelity across generations. Each killer whale pod, a stable family group consisting of a matriarch and her descendants, has its own unique set of calls, a vocal dialect that serves as an acoustic badge of identity. When two pods from the same clan meet, they share enough calls in common to recognize each other as relatives, as members of the same broader community. But pods from different clans have completely different call repertoire. They live in the same waters, encounter the same environmental conditions, and are genetically similar, yet they maintain these distinct vocal traditions with extraordinary precision. How do these dialects persist? The answer lies in social learning. Newborn orcas don't instinctively know their pod's calls. They learn them through a process of vocal learning that's rare in mammals. Young calves listen to their mothers and other pod members, gradually learning to produce the correct sound. This vocal learning ability, once thought to be limited to humans and a few other primates, has now been demonstrated in orcas. Researchers have even trained captive killer whales to mimic human words like hello and bye-bye, demonstrating the flexibility of their vocal learning capability. One orca named Wiki learned to reproduce new sounds on her first attempt, showing remarkable imitative abilities. But culture in killer whales extends far beyond vocalizations. Perhaps the most striking evidence comes from dietary tradition. Around the world, different populations of killer whales specialize in different prey, and these specializations are learned behaviors passed down through generations rather than genetic adaptation. In the Pacific Northwest, 3 distinct ecotypes of killer whales share the same waters but maintain completely different dietary traditions. The resident killer whales are fish specialists, feeding primarily on salmon. They live in large, stable matrilineal pods, are highly vocal, and use echolocation extensively to locate their prey in the murky coastal waters. The transient killer whales, also called Bigg's killer whales, are mammal hunters, preying on seals, sea lions, porpoises, and even other whales. They travel in smaller groups, are much quieter to avoid alerting their acoustically sensitive prey, and use echolocation far less frequently. The offshore killer whales, the least studied of the three, range widely and feed primarily on sharks, to the point where their teeth become worn down to the gums from chewing through the shark's tough, sandpapery skin. These three ecotypes are genetically distinct and don't interbreed, despite living in overlapping territory. They're diverging so substantially that some scientists believe we may be witnessing the evolution of separate species, driven not primarily by geographic isolation or environmental differences, but by cultural tradition. The dietary preferences of each ecotype, learned and reinforced through generations, have shaped their entire way of life, from their social structures, to their vocalizations, to their hunting strategies. Culture, in this case, is literally driving evolutionary change. The residents' focus on salmon is so strong that it's maintained even when it threatens their survival. The southern resident killer whales, a small population of fewer than 90 individuals, have experienced severe population decline, partly because their preferred prey, Chinook salmon, has become scarce. Yet despite having opportunities to hunt other prey that's more abundant, like seals and porpoises, they largely refuse to switch. They're so committed to their cultural tradition of salmon eating that they'll starve rather than hunt mammal. This is a sobering example of how strong cultural traditions can be, sometimes persisting even when they're no longer adaptive. Around the world, other killer whale populations display equally distinct cultural traditions. In Antarctica, some orca populations specialize in hunting minke whales. Others focus on penguins. Still others have perfected the wave-washing technique for hunting seals on ice floes, a behavior we'll explore in detail later. Each of these hunting specializations is a learned cultural tradition, passed from experienced hunters to younger pod members through observation, imitation, and sometimes direct teaching. Cultural traditions extend beyond hunt. In British Columbia, some resident killer whale pods regularly visit what researchers call rubbing beaches, specific locations with smooth pebbles where orcas come to rub their bodies against the seafloor. This behavior appears to serve social functions, with multiple pod members participating together in what looks like a communal spa session. The specific beaches used are traditional sites, visited year after year by the same pod. Other pods in the same waters don't engage in this behavior at all, even though they pass by the same beaches. It's a cultural tradition specific to certain populations. The southern resident killer whales of the Pacific Northwest engage in elaborate greeting ceremonies when pods that have been separated reunite. The whales line up in two opposing rows, then come together in what observers describe as a joyful mixing, with individuals from different pods swimming closely together, vocalizing intensively, and engaging in physical contact. The acoustic display during these ceremonies is remarkable, with all the whales calling simultaneously, creating what almost sounds like singing. The northern resident killer whales, closely related genetically and living in nearby waters, don't perform these elaborate greeting ceremonies. It's another example of cultural difference between populations. Perhaps the most intriguing evidence of orca culture comes from temporary behavioral fads, fleeting fashions that sweep through populations and then In 1987, a population of orcas in the Pacific Northwest suddenly began wearing dead salmon on their heads, balancing the fish on their rostrums as they swam. One whale started it, others copied, and for several months, salmon hats became all the rage among these orcas. Then, as mysteriously as it had begun, the behavior stopped. The whales simply moved on to the next thing. In 2023 and 2024, researchers observed the behavior returning, with at least one whale photographed sporting a salmon hat again. Whether this represents a resurgence of the old fad or an independent rediscovery remains unclear. More recently, a population of killer whales off the coast of Spain and Portugal began a behavior that captured global attention, deliberately ramming boats and damaging their rudder. This behavior, which began around 2020, has been observed hundreds of times and appears to spread through the population as younger whales learn it from their elders. While the motivation remains debated, scientists agree that the spread of the behavior demonstrates social learning and cultural transmission. These temporary fads provide fascinating insights into orca culture. They show that killer whales don't just maintain stable traditions, they also innovate, experiment and adopt new behaviors purely through social learning, without any obvious practical benefit. This is creativity expressed through culture, the same kind of creative cultural expression we see in human fashions and trends. The maintenance of distinct cultures across generations requires sophisticated cognitive capability. Young orcas must be able to observe and remember the behaviors of adults, to practice these behaviors until they master them, and then to teach them to the next generation. Adults must be motivated to teach and patient enough to allow youngsters to practice, even when those early attempts are clumsy and unsuccessful. The whole process requires extensive social learning, a long childhood during which young animals can learn without the immediate pressure of having to survive independently, and stable social structures that keep teachers and learners together over extended periods. Killer whales have all of these elements. Their calves stay with their mothers for life in many populations, providing decades of opportunity for learning. The matrilineal pod structure means that knowledge can be transmitted not just from mother to offspring, but from grandmothers, aunts, and older siblings as well. This all-parental teaching, where pod members other than the mother participate in educating young whales, is crucial for transmitting complex cultural knowledge. The result is populations of killer whales with distinct identities shaped by their cultural tradition. A southern resident killer whale is southern resident not just because of where it lives or its genetic makeup, but because of what it's learned: how to hunt salmon, which calls to use, when to perform greeting ceremony, and all the other subtle traditions that define the population's way of life. Culture, for killer whales as for humans, is what makes you who you are beyond your biology. This cultural sophistication has profound implications. It means that protecting killer whale populations isn't just about preserving genetic diversity, it's also about preserving cultural diversity, the accumulated knowledge and traditions that define each population. When a population declines or disappears, we lose not just genes but an entire culture, a unique way of being an orca that took generations to develop and can never be recovered once lost. As you drift towards sleep, consider what it means for an animal to have culture, to maintain traditions across generations, to innovate and create new behaviors that spread through population. This is intelligence expressed socially, cognition that exists not just in individual brains but in the collective knowledge of communities. It's one of the highest expressions of animal intelligence, and killer whales have achieved it independently from our own cultural species.
The ocean is a challenging environment for hunting. Prey can move in 3 dimensions, disappearing into the depths, or fleeing across vast distances.
Many prey species are fast, agile, and alert. Some are dangerous, capable of defending themselves or even injuring their predators. Yet killer whales have become the ocean's apex predators, masters of hunting in this challenging environment, not through sheer physical power alone, but through intelligence, cooperation, and learned techniques that rank among the most sophisticated hunting strategies in the animal kingdom. Let's begin in the cold waters of Antarctica, where a unique population of killer whales has perfected one of the most remarkable hunting techniques ever documented. These are the type B orcas, specifically adapted to hunting seals in the pack ice that surrounds the Antarctic continent. Their preferred prey, Weddell seals, take refuge on ice floes, floating platforms where they can rest safely above the water, seemingly out of reach of marine predators. But these killer whales have found a way to hunt seals on ice, using water itself as a tool in a display of creativity and coordination that leaves observers stunned. The Antarctic environment presents unique challenges for marine predators. The pack ice extends for hundreds of miles, creating a constantly shifting maze of ice floes, open water, and partially frozen seas. Water temperatures hover near or below freezing. Visibility can be limited by suspended ice crystals and plankton blooms, and the seals that rest on the ice have excellent hearing and vision, making them difficult to approach undetected. Yet within this harsh environment, Type B killer whales have not only survived but thrived, developing hunting techniques specifically adapted to the unique conditions. These whales are visually distinctive from other killer whale populations, with a slightly different color pattern that includes a larger eye patch and a more extensive cape of dark coloration extending down their sides. They're smaller than some other killer whale populations, typically reaching 23 to 28 feet in length, a size that may be advantageous for the precise maneuvering required in their hunting technique. They live in relatively small pods, usually containing fewer than 10 individuals, though multiple pods may coordinate during hunts when circumstances allow. The technique is called wave washing, and watching it unfold is like witnessing a military operation carried out with precision and strategic thinking. It begins with reconnaissance. The orcas spy hop, lifting their heads vertically out of the water to survey the ice floes, searching for seal. But they're not just looking for any seal. Research has shown that these orcas can distinguish between different seal species while spy hopping, and they're selective about which ones they target. They prefer Weddell seals, which are relatively docile and easier to handle once in the water. Craybeater seals and leopard seals, which are more aggressive and agile, are usually avoided. When craybeaters or leopard seals are accidentally washed off ice, the orcas often let them go, apparently recognizing their mistake. Once the whales identify a suitable target, they gather. Multiple individuals position themselves in a coordinated line, swimming parallel to each other, maintaining precise spacing. Then, in perfect synchronization, they begin to swim toward the ice floe, building speed. As they approach, they turn onto their sides in a single fluid motion, a coordinated rotation that happens simultaneously across the entire group. Then they dive beneath the ice, but not before using their massive tails to give one final push to the water above them. The result is a wave, sometimes multiple waves, that surge toward the ice floe with surprising force. These aren't small ripples. The waves can be powerful enough to flood the entire surface of an ice floe, washing the seal into the water or at least destabilizing the ice enough to make the seal's perch precarious. If the first wave doesn't succeed, the whales regroup and try again, sometimes creating wave after wave for hours, gradually breaking up the ice and exhausting the seal's ability to maintain its grip. The sophistication of this technique cannot be overstated. The whales must coordinate their movements with remarkable precision. They must judge the distance to the ice, the size and stability of the flow, the position of the seal, and the wave force needed to dislodge it. They must time their dive perfectly to maximize the wave's amplitude, and they must do all of this while swimming at high speed in murky water, using their echolocation to maintain formation and avoid colliding with each other or the ice. Scientists who have studied wave washing describe it as one of the clearest examples of tool use in SETI. The orcas are using water, manipulating its properties to achieve a goal that would otherwise be impossible. They've figured out fluid dynamics through trial and error, learning that synchronized swimming and precisely timed dives can create waves large enough to reach seals on ice platform. This isn't instinct. Young orcas are often present during wave washing events, learning by watching the adults, gradually figuring out the coordination and timing required for successful hunts. The teaching aspect of wave washing has been documented in remarkable footage. Young orcas participate in the coordinated swims, learning the formation, the approach, and the timing. Adults appear to be patient with youngsters' mistakes, allowing them to be part of the hunt even when their inexperienced participation might reduce the chances of immediate success. Over time, through repeated practice and observation, young orcas master the technique, joining the ranks of skilled wave washers who can execute this complex behavior with the precision it requires. But wave washing is just one example of cultural hunting traditions among orcas. Travel thousands of miles north to the coast of Patagonia, Argentina, or to the remote Crozet Islands in the southern Indian Ocean, and you'll find an even more audacious hunting technique: intentional stranding. Here, killer whales have learned to launch themselves onto beaches to catch seals and sea lions basking on the shore. This is perhaps the most dangerous hunting technique practiced by any cetacean, because a mistake could leave the whale permanently stranded, doomed to die on land. Yet these populations have mastered it, perfecting a technique that requires split-second timing, precise judgment of waves and tides, and incredible physical control. The process begins with surveillance. The whales patrol close to shore, looking for seals or sea lions on beach. When they identify a target, they wait for the right moment, timing their approach with incoming waves. Then they accelerate, riding the wave's energy, using their powerful tail flukes to propel themselves at high speed toward the beach. At the last moment, they lunge forward, sliding partially onto the shore, grabbing the seal or sea lion in their jaws, and then immediately working to return to the water. The margin for error is razor thin. Strand too far up the beach, and the whale might not be able to work its way back to deep water. Fail to catch the wave correctly, and the whale could be left high and dry as the water recedes. The technique requires the whale to assess multiple factors simultaneously: the height and timing of waves, the slope and composition of the beach, the tide level, the position and alertness of the prey, and their own momentum and trajectory. What makes intentional stranding particularly remarkable is the teaching process that perpetuates this dangerous tradition. Mothers in these populations actively teach their calves how to strand safely, in what scientists consider one of the clearest examples of genuine teaching in wild animals. At the Crozet Islands, researchers documented the entire learning process for juvenile killer whales. Calves begin practicing stranding at around 4 to 5 years old, initially on their own in playful attempts that might look reckless, but serve a crucial learning function. They try to beach themselves, often in very shallow water where the risk is minimal, learning how their bodies respond to the transition from water to land, figuring out how to generate enough momentum, and experiencing what it feels like to be partially on shore. But actual hunting using this technique doesn't begin until later, and when it does, mothers are intimately involved. A mother will often swim alongside her calf during a stranding attempt, physically pushing the youngster toward the prey and helping position them for a successful catch. If a calf catches prey but can't make it back to the water, the mother intervenes immediately. Researchers have observed mothers accelerating toward the beach, then turning sharply to create an artificial wave, one powerful enough to lift the stranded calf and help float them back to deeper water. This direct intervention, this willingness to risk their own safety to rescue a calf who has made a mistake, demonstrates not just intelligence, but a level of care and teaching investment that's rare in the animal kingdom. The entire learning process can take years. Even at 5 or 6 years old, juvenile orcas still require adult assistance to return to the water with their prey. Full mastery of intentional stranding might not come until a whale is nearly fully grown. During all those years, the young whale is learning, practicing, making mistakes, and gradually perfecting a technique that's essential to their population's way of life. The consequence of this long learning period is that females in these populations have longer gaps between calves than killer whales in other regions. The investment required to teach this dangerous technique means mothers can't reproduce as frequently, but the trade-off is apparently worth it. The ability to access prey on beaches gives these populations access to food resources that would otherwise be unavailable, offsetting the cost of extended maternal care. Across the ocean in Norway, yet another population of killer whales has developed an entirely different sophisticated hunting technique for an entirely different prey. These orcas specialize in hunting herring, and they've perfected what's known as carousel feeding. This technique requires a level of coordination and patience that's breathtaking to observe. When Norwegian killer whales encounter a school of herring, they don't simply attack. Instead, they work together to herd the fish, swimming in coordinated patterns around the school, gradually compressing it into a tight ball near the surface. Individual whales take turns swimming beneath the herring ball and slapping their powerful tail flukes against the fish. The impact stuns or kills multiple herring, which then sink slightly, making them easy to pick off and eat. What makes carousel feeding so sophisticated is the restraint it requires. Any individual whale could break formation and attempt to feed at any time, but doing so would scatter the herring and reduce everyone's success. Instead, the whales maintain discipline, continuing to herd and compress the school, while taking turns feeding in an orderly fashion. This requires not just coordination but also patience, impulse control, and a level of social cooperation that speaks to sophisticated social cognition. The slap and stun technique itself demonstrates learning and cultural transmission. Not all populations of killer whales that hunt fish use this method. It's specific to certain groups, suggesting it's a learned behavior passed down through generations, rather than an instinctive response to encountering schooling fish. Even within populations, individual killer whales can show remarkable innovation in hunting techniques. In captive settings, one orca at Marineland of Canada figured out that it could regurgitate fish onto the water's surface to attract seagulls, then catch and eat the birds when they came to investigate. 4 other orcas in the facility observed this behavior and learned to copy it, demonstrating both creative problem-solving and social learning. Back in the wild, researchers have documented numerous examples of innovative hunting techniques that emerge and spread through population. Some killer whales have learned to follow fishing boats and steal fish directly from long lines, developing techniques to extract the catch without getting hooked themselves. In the Gulf of California, orcas have been observed targeting great white sharks specifically for their livers, apparently having learned that these organs are particularly nutritious and worth the effort of killing such a dangerous prey species. The common thread through all of these hunting strategies is intelligence expressed through culture. None of these techniques are instinctive behaviors hardwired into the orca brain through evolution. They're learned, practiced, refined and transmitted across generations through observation, imitation, and teaching. They represent accumulated cultural knowledge, hunting wisdom built up over countless generations and constantly refined as circumstances change. This cultural approach to hunting gives killer whales enormous flexibility. When environmental conditions change, when prey populations shift, when new opportunities arise, orcas can potentially adapt by innovating new techniques or modifying old ones. They're not locked into genetic programming. They can learn, experiment, and change their behavior based on experience and observation. At the same time, this reliance on cultural transmission creates vulnerability. If a population declines to the point where there aren't enough experienced hunters to teach younger generations, the cultural knowledge can be lost. The hunting traditions that took generations to develop can disappear in a single generation if the transmission of knowledge is disrupted. This is why understanding orca intelligence and culture is so crucial for conservation. Protecting these animals means protecting not just their populations, but also their accumulated cultural knowledge, the hunting traditions and techniques that define each group's identity and way of life. As your consciousness drifts between waking and sleeping, imagine being part of a coordinated wave-washing team, swimming in perfect synchronization with your podmates, feeling the water surge beneath you as you time your dive to create that perfect wave. Imagine the patience of a mother orca, teaching her calf to strand, watching patiently as the youngster makes mistake after mistake, always ready to create that rescue wave if things go wrong. This is intelligence in action, problem solving and teaching, creativity and culture, all working together in the alien environment beneath the wave.
If hunting techniques like wave washing and intentional stranding were innate, hardwired behaviors passed down genetically, they would appear fully formed in young killer whales, ready to use without practice or instruction. But that's not what happens. Instead, these sophisticated techniques must be learned, practiced for years, and actively taught by experienced adults to younger generations. This transmission of knowledge through teaching and learning is one of the most remarkable aspects of orca intelligence, revealing cognitive capabilities that rival those of our own species. The existence of genuine teaching in wild animals has been debated among scientists for decades. Teaching, in the strict scientific sense, requires several conditions to be met. The teacher must modify their behavior in the presence of a naive learner. This modification must have a cost to the teacher in terms of time or energy. The behavior wouldn't occur in the absence of a learner, and the learner must acquire skills more rapidly or efficiently than they would through individual learning alone. By these rigorous criteria, teaching is rare in the animal kingdom, documented convincingly in only a handful of species. Killer whales meet all these criteria. The intentional stranding behavior we discussed earlier provides perhaps the clearest example of teaching in wild orcas. At the Crozet Islands and Patagonia, researchers have documented the entire process of how young orcas learn this dangerous technique. And at every stage, Adult involvement goes far beyond simply allowing youngsters to observe. The teaching process begins with what scientists call social beaching play. Adult female orcas, particularly those skilled at intentional stranding, will deliberately beach themselves on safe areas of shoreline when young calves are present, essentially demonstrating the technique in low-risk situations. These demonstration strandings often occur on gentle slopes where the risk of becoming truly stuck is minimal, suggesting the adults are deliberately choosing teaching contexts where mistakes won't be fatal. The calves watch these demonstrations closely and then attempt to copy them. At first, their efforts are clumsy and poorly coordinated. They might approach too fast, misjudge the wave timing, or fail to generate enough momentum to reach the shore. But the adults remain patient, repeating the demonstrations and allowing the youngsters multiple attempts to practice. As the calves grow older and gain more confidence, adult females actively participate in their hunting attempts. When a juvenile attempts to strand and catch prey, an adult female, usually but not always the mother, will position herself between the shore and the young whale. This positioning serves multiple purposes. It helps prevent the youngster from stranding too far up the beach, provides physical support if the calf needs help returning to the water, and allows the adult to push the youngster toward the prey at the optimal moment. This physical assistance is crucial during the learning phase. A mother orca might use her rostrum to push her calf toward a seal, helping the youngster position correctly for the grab. If the calf successfully catches prey but becomes stuck or can't figure out how to return to deeper water, the mother immediately intervenes. As mentioned earlier, mothers will create artificial waves by accelerating toward the beach and turning sharply, generating enough water movement to help float the stranded calf back to safety. These rescue interventions come at a cost. The mother risks her own safety every time she accelerates toward the shore to create a rescue wave. She expends significant energy in these teaching efforts, and the time spent teaching means less time available for her own hunting and feeding. Yet the mothers persist, investing years in teaching their offspring a technique that's essential to the population's survival. The alloparental aspect of orca teaching is equally fascinating. In matrilineal pod structures, aunts, grandmothers, and older siblings also participate in teaching young whales. At the Crozet Islands, researchers documented a case where one calf was associated more often with two adult females other than its mother during intentional stranding attempt. Analysis revealed that this calf's mother stranded less frequently than these other two females. The calf appeared to be learning primarily from the most skilled practitioners available, regardless of whether they were direct relatives. This suggests that orcas can recognize skill levels in others, and that young whales seek out the best teachers, while skilled adults are willing to invest in teaching even when the learner isn't their own offspring. This alloparental teaching is cognitively sophisticated. It requires adults to recognize that a young whale needs instruction, to assess their own skill level, and to modify their behavior to facilitate learning. It requires the young whale to assess which adults are most skilled and to preferentially associate with them during learning opportunities. And it requires social bonds strong enough that adults are willing to invest time and energy in teaching youngsters that aren't their genetic offspring. The length of the learning period for complex techniques like intentional stranding, 4 to 6 years or more, reveals another crucial aspect of orca intelligence: the capacity for extended learning and delayed gratification. Young orcas don't need to hunt independently for survival during this period. They're still nursing, still receiving care and food from their mothers and other pod members. This extended childhood, where young animals can learn complex skills without the immediate pressure of having to survive on their own, is a hallmark of intelligent species. It's seen in humans, primates, elephants, and now we know in killer whales. But teaching in orcas extends beyond hunting techniques. Young orcas must also learn their pod's vocal dialect, a process that involves careful listening, practice, and feedback. When calves begin producing vocalizations, they start with imperfect versions of the adult. Through repeated attempts and presumably some form of feedback from adults, they gradually refine their calls until they match the pod's dialect precisely. This vocal learning process, like human language learning, requires both a capacity for imitation and a long period of practice. The precision with which dialects are maintained across generations is remarkable. Recordings of specific pods made in the 1950s sound virtually identical to recordings of the same pods made decades later. This suggests that young whales are learning the calls with extreme accuracy, that adults are providing consistent models to copy, and that the entire pod maintains a standard of vocal precision that allows the dialect to persist unchanged across generations. Communication learning also includes understanding what different calls mean and when to use them. While scientists don't yet fully understand the meaning of most orca vocalizations, it's clear that calls are used in specific contexts. Some calls seem to function as contact calls, keeping pod members in touch when they're spread out. Others might signal excitement, alarm, or other emotional state. Learning when to produce which calls, learning to interpret what others' calls mean, and learning to coordinate vocalizations with other pod members all require sophisticated social learning. Beyond vocalizations, young orcas must learn the complex social rules that govern pod life. They learn their position within the social hierarchy, learning to recognize relationships between other pod members, and understanding how to navigate interactions with dominant and subordinate individuals. They learn about kinship, about which individuals are closely related, and which are more distant relatives, information that influences social interactions and cooperation. They must learn the pod's territory, memorizing the locations of productive hunting grounds, navigation routes between different areas, and the timing of salmon runs or seal breeding seasons in different locations. This geographic knowledge is extensive. Killer whale pods can have ranges of thousands of square miles, and individuals must remember not just where things are, but also when certain locations are productive, information that requires understanding seasonal patterns and cycle. The cumulative effect of all this learning is that killer whale knowledge is largely experiential and cultural rather than instinctive. A young orca raised in isolation from its pod, hypothetically speaking, would lack almost everything it needs to survive as a wild killer whale. It wouldn't know how to hunt efficiently. It wouldn't know what prey to target. It wouldn't know its pod's vocal dialect. It wouldn't know the territory. It wouldn't know the social rules. In this sense, killer whales are culturally dependent animals, much like humans. Our intelligence allows us to create culture, but it also makes us dependent on culture for survival. The same appears true for orcas. This cultural dependence creates both opportunity and vulnerability. The opportunity is flexibility and adaptability. Because so much of what killer whales know is learned rather than instinctive, they can potentially adapt to changing circumstances by innovating new techniques and teaching them to younger generations. The vulnerability is that cultural knowledge can be lost if transmission is disrupted. If a population declines to critical levels, if experienced adults disappear before they can fully teach the next generation, centuries of accumulated cultural wisdom can vanish. Research on teaching and learning in killer whales continues to reveal new layers of sophistication. Studies using acoustic tags have shown that mothers adjust their calling behavior when calves are present, possibly to facilitate learning. Observations of play behavior suggest that much of what looks like simple fun may actually serve important learning functions, allowing young whales to practice skills in low-stakes context. And studies of how quickly new behaviors spread through populations, like the boat ramming behavior off Spain, reveal social learning networks that allow information to flow efficiently through orca community. As you settle deeper into sleep, imagine the patience required to teach complex skills across years. Imagine being a young orca, watching your mother create waves, attempting to copy her, failing repeatedly, but continuing to practice because the social support is there, because the pod will feed you and protect you while you learn, because there's no pressure to succeed immediately. This is what advanced intelligence enables: the luxury of extended learning, the cultural transmission of accumulated knowledge, and the patient teaching that makes it all possible.
In the dark depths of the ocean, where sunlight fails to penetrate and visibility is measured in feet rather than miles, killer whales navigate with a sophistication that seems almost magical. They hunt in complete darkness, locate individual fish from hundreds of feet away, and coordinate complex behaviors with pod members they cannot see. The secret to this mastery of their environment lies in one of nature's most elegant solutions to the problem of perception: echolocation, also called biosonar. Echolocation works on a principle that's simple in concept but extraordinarily sophisticated in execution. The whale produces rapid series of clicks, brief pulses of sound that spread outward through the water like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. When these sound waves encounter objects, fish, other whales, rocks, the seafloor, echoes bounce back to the whale. By analyzing these returning echoes, interpreting the time delay between emission and return, the intensity of the echo, and subtle details of how the sound has been altered, killer whales create detailed mental pictures of their surroundings. The clicks themselves are remarkable production. An echolocating killer whale uses structures called phonic lips in its nasal passages, causing surrounding tissue to vibrate and produce the clicks. These clicks are not simple sound. They're broadband signals, containing energy across a wide range of frequencies, typically with peak energy around 20 to 30 kHz at the low end, and 40 to 60 kHz at the higher frequencies. The high-frequency components are well above the range of human hearing. If you were underwater near an echolocating orca, you might hear rapid clicking sounds, but you'd be missing most of the acoustic information the whale is producing and receiving. Each click lasts less than 1 millisecond, a thousandth of a second. The brevity is crucial for precision. Short clicks produce echoes that allow fine discrimination of target features. The whale can produce these clicks in rapid succession, sometimes creating click trains with dozens or even hundreds of clicks per second. When closing in on prey, the click rate increases dramatically, creating what researchers call buzzes, extremely rapid click sequences used for the final approach and capture. The clicks don't radiate equally in all directions. Instead, they're focused into a beam by the melon, a rounded structure in the whale's forehead made of specialized lipids. This acoustic lens directs the sound forward, creating a directed beam of sound energy that the whale can aim at specific target. By moving its head, the whale can scan its environment, building up a detailed acoustic picture through successive echolocation pulses. The returning echoes are received primarily through the lower jaw,
which is specially adapted to conduct sound to the inner ear. The whale's auditory system is exquisitely sensitive, capable of detecting faint echoes and extracting detailed information from subtle variations in the returning sound. This allows killer whales to determine not just the location and distance of targets, but also their size, shape, texture, and even internal structure. In the Pacific Northwest, resident killer whales that specialize in hunting salmon have developed their echolocation abilities to a remarkable degree. Research has shown that these orcas can detect fish at distances exceeding 300 feet, much farther than they could see in the often murky coastal waters. But distance detection is just the beginning. These whales can discriminate between different salmon species based on the acoustic signature of their swim bladders, the gas-filled organs that fish use to maintain buoyancy. This discrimination ability is so precise that the whales show clear preferences for specific salmon species, particularly Chinook salmon, the largest salmon in the Pacific. Experimental studies have demonstrated that the acoustic echoes returning from Chinook swim bladders differ subtly from those of other salmon species. The whales have learned to recognize these differences, allowing them to identify individual fish by species before ever seeing them or tasting them. They're literally seeing with sound in a way that reveals details invisible to the eye. The sophistication extends further. Killer whales appear able to determine not just the species of fish, but also their size and orientation. The swim bladder's acoustic signature varies depending on whether the fish is oriented horizontally or vertically, head up or head down. A mature Chinook salmon has a larger swim bladder than a younger fish. The whales can apparently detect these differences, allowing them to select the largest, most valuable prey items while ignoring smaller fish that aren't worth the energy expenditure to pursue. This ability to assess prey value remotely, through echolocation alone, represents sophisticated decision-making. The whale must interpret complex acoustic information, compare it to learned templates of different prey types and sizes, calculate the energy value of pursuing this particular fish versus continuing to search for better opportunities, and make split-second decisions about whether to pursue. All of this happens in the dark, at depth, while swimming at speed. The integration of echolocation with other senses creates a remarkably complete picture of the environment. Killer whales use vision when at the surface and in clear water, acoustic information from both active echolocation and passive listening at all times, and likely other sensory modalities we're still learning about. They integrate all of this information seamlessly, switching between sensory modalities as conditions demand, creating what must be a rich, multi-dimensional perception of their world. Interestingly, different killer whale populations use echolocation differently, another indication that even sensory behavior is culturally influenced. Resident killer whales which hunt fish echolocate frequently and loudly. Their fish prey don't have good hearing in the frequency range of sonar clicks, so there's no advantage to being quiet. In fact, being loud might even help, producing stronger echoes that can be detected from greater distance. Transient or Biggs killer whales which hunt marine mammals use echolocation much more sparingly and at lower intensities. Their prey, seals, sea lions, porpoises, and whales have excellent hearing in the frequency range of echolocation click. These prey animals can potentially hear the clicks and be alerted to the orca's presence, so transient orcas have adapted culturally, not genetically, to hunt more quietly, relying more on passive listening and vision rather than active echolocation, especially when approaching prey. They save their echolocation for situations where stealth isn't required, when they need precise navigation information or when pursuing prey that's already detected them. This cultural adaptation of sensory strategies demonstrates remarkable flexibility. The same species with the same basic sensory equipment employs that equipment in fundamentally different ways based on the demands of their particular hunting lifestyle. This isn't instinct determining behavior, it's learning, cultural transmission, and strategic thinking determining how to use available sensory tools most effectively. The click trains used in echolocation also serve another function. They maintain acoustic contact between pod members. When multiple orcas are hunting together in the dark depths, they can't see each other, but they can hear each other's echolocation click. The unique acoustic signature of each individual's clicks may allow pod members to identify who is where, maintaining formation and coordination even when spread across large areas and separated by hundreds of feet of dark water. Recent research using acoustic tags attached to individual killer whales has revealed fascinating details about how echolocation is used during actual hunting. The tags record all sounds produced by and reaching the tagged whale, allowing researchers to correlate echolocation behavior with hunting success. These studies show that during successful salmon captures, killer whales dramatically increase their echolocation rate in the final moments before seizing the fish. The rapid buzz of clicks in the final approach is similar to what's seen in dolphins and other toothed whales, apparently providing the rapid-fire acoustic updates needed for the precise final movements required to capture fast-moving prey. The studies also revealed that killer whales don't echolocate continuously. Even when hunting, they produce clicks in bursts, scanning their environment periodically rather than constant. This intermittent approach conserves energy, reduces the chance of prey detecting the clicks, and may allow time for processing the complex acoustic information between click trains. After a successful capture, echolocation rates drop dramatically. The whale has its prey and no longer needs to search. This pattern, consistent across multiple individuals and hunting events, demonstrates that echolocation is used strategically, ramped up when needed for prey detection and tracking, then reduced when its purpose is accomplished. The neural processing required for effective echolocation must be extraordinary. The whale's brain must generate precisely timed clicks, focus them in the desired direction, receive and process returning echoes that may be much quieter than the outgoing click, filter out echoes from irrelevant objects while focusing on targets of interest, extract detailed information about target characteristics from subtle features of the echoes, integrate acoustic information from multiple successive clicks to build up coherent mental images, and coordinate all of this while swimming, maintaining social contact with pod members, and executing complex hunting maneuvers. That this all happens seamlessly, allowing killer whales to navigate and hunt with remarkable efficiency in complete darkness, speaks to the sophistication of their auditory processing systems. As your own sensory awareness dims with the approach of sleep, consider what it would be like to perceive the world primarily through sound, to build mental images from echoes, to recognize fish species and individual pod members by their acoustic signatures, to navigate through darkness with the same confidence you have in daylight. This is the sensory world of the killer whale, an alien way of experiencing reality that's no less rich or detailed than our visual world, just fundamentally different.
The presence of spindle neurons and the expanded paralimbic system in killer whale brains suggests something profound. These animals may experience emotions at a depth and complexity that matches or exceeds our own. But brain structure alone can't tell us what it's like to be an orca, what they feel, how they experience their social world. For that, we must turn to observation, to the accumulating evidence from decades of watching how these animals interact, how they respond to loss,
how they celebrate reunion, and how they maintain relationships across entire lifetimes. The most heart-wrenching evidence of orca emotional depth came in the summer of 2018, when a female orca known as J35 or Tahlequah gave birth to a calf that lived only half an hour. What happened next captured worldwide attention and spoke volumes about the capacity for grief in these animals. Tahlequah wouldn't let her baby go. For 17 days she carried the calf's body, sometimes balancing it on her rostrum, sometimes pushing it along the surface, swimming hundreds of miles with her dead infant. Other pod members appeared to assist, taking turns supporting the body when Tahlequah needed to dive for food or rest. This behavior, which researchers called a tour of grief, cost Tahlequah dearly. She lost a tremendous amount of body weight during those 17 days, visibly deteriorating as she devoted her energy to carrying her dead calf rather than foraging properly. Her pod mates stayed close, maintaining social cohesion despite the need to range widely to find food. The entire event spoke to a depth of emotional attachment between mother and offspring that's difficult to witness without recognizing it as grief, genuine mourning for a loved one lost. This isn't an isolated case. Researchers have documented numerous instances of killer whales displaying behaviors that appear to indicate grief. 2 adult male orcas, believed to be brothers, were observed following the route their mother had taken in her final movements after she died, retracing her path as if looking for her or honoring her memory. They withdrew from normal social interactions with other pod members, showed reduced foraging activity, and exhibited what can only be described as mourning behavior. Other observations have documented orcas appearing to grieve for pod members lost to human activity, including a case where a mother pushed her deceased calf toward a boat, as if seeking help or trying to show what had been lost. The fact that grief appears in killer whales isn't surprising given their social structure. These are animals that live in stable family groups where individuals may never separate from their mothers in their entire life. Male orcas, even as adults, often spend most of their time traveling with their mothers. Females maintain relationships with their offspring across generations, creating extended family networks where grandmothers, mothers, daughters, aunts, and sisters all interact. Bonds forged over decades of constant companionship must run extraordinarily deep. When those bonds are severed by death, it would be strange if there were no emotional response. But emotion in killer whales extends far beyond grief. At the other end of the spectrum, orcas display clear signs of joy and playfulness. The greeting ceremonies performed by southern resident killer whales when pods reunite have an unmistakable quality of celebration. The whales approach each other rapidly. The acoustic environment erupts with excited vocalizations. Individuals engage in physical contact, rubbing against each other, and the overall energy of the encounter speaks to genuine pleasure at reunion. Play behavior in orcas, particularly among juveniles but continuing into adulthood, demonstrates emotion-driven behavior that serves no immediate survival function. Young orcas chase each other, engage in mock hunts, leap out of the water in spectacular breaches, slap their tails and flippers on the surface, and manipulate objects like kelp fronds, tossing them and catching them repeatedly. This isn't practice for survival skills, though some play may have that secondary benefit. This is play for its own sake, behavior motivated by enjoyment, by the positive emotional rewards of the activity itself. Mothers display clear affection toward their calves, often positioning themselves protectively when threats are near, maintaining close physical contact, and showing what appears to be patience and tolerance for their offspring's sometimes demanding behavior. Calves nurse for extended periods, far beyond the point of nutritional necessity, suggesting that nursing continues partly for the social bonding and comfort it provides rather than just for nutrition. The social bonds between adult pod members appear equally strong. Certain individuals show clear preferences for associating with specific others. Research on social networks within pods has revealed that orcas don't interact randomly with all pod members equally. Instead, they form friendships, preferentially spending time with certain individuals based apparently on compatibility, shared interests, or mutual affection. These friendships often form between individuals of similar age and the same sex, suggesting that personality compatibility plays a role in partner selection. Cooperation in hunting requires not just coordination but trust. When multiple killer whales work together in wave washing or carousel feeding, each individual must trust that the others will maintain their positions, that no one will break formation prematurely, that the benefits of cooperation will be shared. This trust must be built and maintained through consistent social interaction, through demonstrated reliability, through a history of successful cooperation. It's a form of social capital built on emotional connection and sustained positive interaction. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, appears present in killer whale. The alloparental care we discussed earlier, where pod members other than the mother invest in caring for and teaching calves, requires a form of empathy, a recognition that the calf needs care and a motivation to provide it despite the personal cost. When orcas assist each other in carrying dead calves, when they adjust their behavior to accommodate injured pod members, when they coordinate hunts in ways that ensure all participants get fed, they're demonstrating a capacity to recognize others' needs and respond to them. The long-term memory required to maintain social relationships across decades speaks to the importance of individual identity in orca society. Killer whales recognize individual pod members by their vocalizations, their physical appearance, and likely other characteristics we haven't yet identified. They remember relationships, remembering which individuals are close relatives, which are more distant kin, which are preferred associates, and which are dominant or subordinate in the social hierarchy. They track relationship changes over time, adjusting their behavior as calves grow to maturity, as older whales become less vigorous, as social dynamics shift. This sophisticated social cognition, the ability to track multiple relationships simultaneously, to remember social history, to predict how others will behave based on past experience, to navigate complex social landscapes, where who you know and how you relate to them determines much of your success in life, is fundamentally similar to human social intelligence. We're both species whose survival depends heavily on successfully navigating social relationships. We're both culturally dependent animals whose learning happens through social transmission. We both live in stable groups, where relationships can last, and apparently, we both evolved the emotional capabilities necessary to maintain these complex social systems: attachment, grief, joy, empathy, trust, and all the other emotions that make social life possible. Research comparing social bonds in killer whales to those in primates has revealed striking similarities. A study examining social networks in orca pods found that the strength of social associations between individuals was comparable to what's seen in humans and chimpanzees. The researchers identified clear friendships, documented consistent interaction patterns, and showed that these social preferences were stable over time. As one researcher noted, observing two distantly related young males who were constantly together it seemed entirely appropriate to use the word friendship to describe their relationship. The complexity of orca social life extends beyond the immediate. Different pods within the same clan recognize each other and interact peacefully, engaging in social exchanges that strengthen inter-pod bonds. Pods from different clans, despite living in overlapping territories, maintain distinct identities and generally don't interact as closely, suggesting a level of cultural identity that goes beyond simple family ties. These interpod dynamics, the ability to recognize and remember relationships with individuals from other groups, to maintain alliances and avoid conflicts through social awareness, speaks to social cognition operating at a community level, not just within immediate family groups. The emotional intelligence displayed by killer whales has profound implications for how we view them. These aren't simple creatures operating on instinct. They're individuals with distinct personalities, embedded in complex social networks, experiencing rich emotional lives, forming deep bonds with specific others, and apparently capable of the full range of emotions we associate with personhood: love, grief, joy, friendship, empathy, and perhaps much more that we haven't yet recognized. As you drift further towards sleep, imagine living in a society where you never leave your family, where your mother might be by your side for your entire life, where friendships formed in youth could last for decades, where every member of your community is known to you as an individual, where communication is constant and rich, where cooperation is essential and trust is paramount. This is the social world of the killer whale, a world where emotional intelligence isn't a luxury but a necessity, where the ability to maintain complex social bonds across a lifetime determines success, survival, and happiness.
Intelligence isn't just about knowing things or following traditions. True cognitive sophistication requires the ability to respond flexibly to novel situations, to solve problems creatively, to innovate when existing knowledge proves insufficient. By these measures, killer whales demonstrate remarkable intelligence, showing creativity and problem-solving abilities that challenge our assumptions about animal cognition. The experimental evidence for killer whale creativity comes from systematic studies conducted with animals in human care. Researchers trained 9 killer whales ranging in age from 5 to 29 years on what's called the innovate concept. The whales were given a specific signal that meant do something new, something they hadn't done before in that session. The task required the whales to understand the concept of novelty, to remember what behaviors they'd already performed, and to generate original actions on command. All 9 killer whales succeeded at this task, demonstrating what researchers call fluency, the ability to generate multiple different novel behaviors. Some individuals showed remarkable creativity, inventing entirely new combinations of movements or modifying familiar behaviors in novel ways. The whales displayed originality, creating behaviors that were genuinely novel rather than minor variations on familiar actions. They showed elaboration, adding complexity to simple behavior, and they demonstrated flexibility, the ability to switch between different types of novel behaviors rather than getting stuck in one pattern. These results are significant because they show that killer whales understand abstract concepts, like novelty, and can think creatively when requested to do so. They're not simply responding to stimuli with pre-programmed responses. They're generating new behaviors, evaluating whether those behaviors meet the criteria of being novel, and adjusting their responses based on feedback. This is creative cognition, the same kind of flexible thinking that underlies human creativity. In the wild,
This creative problem-solving manifests in how killer whales respond to novel challenges. When researchers introduced underwater acoustic recorders into orca territories, some whales initially showed curiosity about these strange objects, approaching them, vocalizing near them, and even manipulating them physically. Over time, they apparently decided the objects weren't threats and largely ignored them, a decision that reflects assessment, learning, and adaptive response to something entirely outside their previous experience. The boat interaction behaviors that began off the coast of Spain and Portugal around 2020 provide another example of innovation and social learning in action. Individual killer whales, likely starting with one or a few individuals, discovered that ramming boat rudders produced interesting results. The behavior spread through the population as other whales observed it, tried it themselves, and apparently found it engaging enough to continue. Whether the motivation is play, curiosity, or something else remains debated, but the rapid spread of the behavior through the population demonstrates social learning of novel behaviors, creativity in developing new interaction patterns, and the flexibility to incorporate entirely new behaviors into the population's repertoire. Vocal mimicry provides compelling evidence of killer whales' learning abilities and creative use of sound. We've already mentioned that killer whales can learn to mimic human speech sounds, but the implications of this ability extend further. In the wild, some killer whale populations have been observed mimicking the vocalizations of other marine species by producing sounds that resemble those of dolphins, seals, or other animals. Orcas might confuse prey, deceive other predators, or accomplish other objectives we haven't yet understood. This mimicry isn't simple imitation. It requires the whale to listen to another animal's sounds, analyze the acoustic features that make those sounds distinctive, generate similar sounds using entirely different vocal anatomy, and assess whether the reproduction is accurate enough to serve its purpose. The neural processing underlying this ability must be sophisticated, involving auditory analysis, motor planning, and sensory feedback integration. The famous case of an orca named Wiki learning to mimic new sounds provides experimental evidence of this capability. Wiki was able to copy both the vocalizations of other orcas and entirely novel sounds, including human words, after just one or a few attempts. Her rapid learning demonstrated an ability to analyze acoustic patterns quickly and reproduce them accurately. Skills that require both perceptual sophistication and motor control. Problem solving in killer whales extends to mechanical challenges as well. While they don't have hands to manipulate tools in the way primates do, orcas have found creative ways to use their environment and their bodies to solve problems. The intentional stranding technique is essentially tool use, using the beach as an anvil against which to trap prey. Wave washing uses water as a tool, manipulating fluid dynamics to achieve objectives. Some populations have learned to stun fish by slapping them with their powerful tail flukes, using their own bodies as weapons in ways that require precise targeting and force calibration. Orcas have also shown the ability to learn from and exploit human activities. Some populations follow fishing vessels, learning when and how to steal fish from nets or longline. They've figured out how to extract fish without damaging equipment or getting caught themselves, a problem-solving feat that requires understanding the mechanical properties of fishing gear and developing techniques for manipulation despite their lack of hands. This isn't trial and error producing random success. It's systematic problem-solving, likely involving observation of successful individuals by others and social transmission of learned techniques. The adaptability of killer whales to changing circumstances demonstrates cognitive flexibility. When environmental conditions shift, when prey populations change, when new opportunities or challenges arise. Some orca populations have shown the ability to modify their behaviors accordingly, while we've also seen that some populations maintain traditional behaviors even when they're no longer optimal, suggesting the power of cultural conservatism. Other populations demonstrate flexibility in adapting to new situations. Memory clearly plays a crucial role in killer whale problem solving. To solve novel problems, they must remember what they've tried before, what worked and what didn't, and apply that knowledge to new situations. Their long-term memory appears robust, with individuals remembering specific locations, hunting techniques, and social relationships across years or even decades. This accumulated experience provides a foundation for creative problem solving, allowing whales to draw on past knowledge when facing new challenges. Individual differences in problem-solving ability and creativity have been documented in killer whales. Some individuals show more creativity than others, generating more novel behaviors or finding solutions more quickly. These individual differences might relate to age and experience, with older whales having more accumulated knowledge to draw on, or they might reflect genuine personality differences, with some individuals being naturally more exploratory, playful, or creative than others. The existence of temporary behavioral fads, like the salmon hats we discussed earlier, demonstrates creativity operating at a population level. Some individual creates a novel behavior, perhaps accidentally, or through experimentation. Others observe it, find it interesting or entertaining, and copy it. The behavior spreads through the population through social learning, persists for a while, and then fades away when novelty wears off. This is cultural evolution in real time, driven by creativity and social learning, producing behavioral patterns that have no obvious survival value, but demonstrate the cognitive capacity for innovation and cultural transmission. Play behavior in killer whales likely serves important functions in developing and maintaining creative problem-solving ability. Through play, young orcas can experiment with novel behaviors in low-stakes contexts, learning physical capabilities, testing social boundaries, and developing the flexible thinking that will serve them throughout their life. Adults continuing to play might maintain this cognitive flexibility, keeping their minds active and responsive to novel stimuli even as they age. The research on killer whale cognition continues to reveal new dimensions of their intelligence. Recent studies using more sophisticated behavioral paradigms, better acoustic recording technology, and improved methods for observing wild behavior are uncovering capabilities we didn't previously appreciate. Each discovery reinforces the conclusion that killer whales possess cognitive sophistication that rivals the great apes and approaches, or even matches our own in certain domains. As your consciousness settles into the peaceful state between waking and sleep, consider what it means to be creative, to solve problems in novel ways, to adapt to changing circumstances through flexible thinking. These capabilities, which we often consider uniquely human, or at least limited to primates, appear in a form of intelligence that evolved entirely independently from our own, in brains structured differently from ours, in creatures whose environment and lifestyle are alien to our terrestrial experience. Intelligence, it seems, is not one thing, but many things. Not one path, but multiple paths leading to similar destinations.
Understanding killer whale intelligence isn't merely an academic exercise. The recognition that these animals possess sophisticated cognition, rich emotional lives, and complex cultures has profound implications for how we view them and how we interact with them. It changes the ethical calculus surrounding conservation,
changes how we assess the impacts of human activities on orca populations, and changes what we must do to ensure their survival. The most immediate implication concerns noise pollution in the ocean. We've discussed how crucial echolocation is for killer whales, particularly for populations that hunt fish. Echolocation is how they navigate, how they locate prey, how they maintain contact with pod members, how they perceive their world. But echolocation requires a quiet acoustic environment. When underwater noise levels increase, the effectiveness of echolocation decreases. The primary source of underwater noise pollution is vessel traffic. Ships, boats, and watercraft of all kinds produce propeller noise, engine noise, and hull noise that propagates through water far more effectively than sound travels through air. In busy shipping lanes and popular areas for recreational boating, background noise levels can be so high that killer whale echolocation becomes significantly impaired. Research has shown that vessel noise masks the returning echoes that whales rely on, essentially making them acoustically blind in their own habitat. The consequences are profound. Studies using acoustic recording tags have documented that when vessel noise increases, killer whales must increase their echolocation intensity, essentially shouting to be heard, which requires more energy. They may need to swim closer to prey before detecting them, reducing hunting efficiency. In some cases, they may be unable to detect prey at all in noisy conditions, forced to abandon hunting and move to quieter areas. For populations that are already nutritionally stressed, like the southern resident killer whales, this additional energetic burden and reduced foraging efficiency can be the difference between survival and population decline. The noise issue extends beyond echolocation to social communication. Killer whales maintain acoustic contact with pod members using their vocalizations. In noisy conditions, these vocalizations may not carry as far, requiring closer spacing between individuals or leading to temporary loss of acoustic contact. The cumulative stress of operating in a chronically noisy environment, of having to work harder to perform basic functions like finding food and maintaining social bonds, likely impacts overall health and well-being. Solutions exist, but require understanding the problem and the will to implement changes. Regulations that restrict vessel speeds or keep boats at certain distances from whales can reduce noise impacts. Design modifications to ships and boats can make them quieter. Creating marine protected areas where vessel traffic is limited or prohibited can provide acoustic refuges where whales can hunt and socialize without constant noise exposure. But implementing these solutions requires recognition that the problem is real and significant, that killer whale well-being is impacted by noise, and that their cognitive and social needs are important enough to warrant action. The cultural nature of killer whale knowledge creates another conservation challenge. When we protect endangered species, we typically focus on maintaining genetic diversity, ensuring enough individuals survive to maintain a healthy gene pool. But for culturally dependent species like killer whales, protecting genetic diversity alone isn't sufficient. We must also protect cultural diversity, the accumulated knowledge and traditions that define each population. If a population of killer whales that performs wave washing declines to a point where there aren't enough experienced adults to teach younger generations, the technique could be lost even if the population genetically recovers. The hunting method that took generations to develop and refine, that's been passed down through centuries of cultural transmission, could disappear in a single generation. That loss would be irreversible. You can't reconstruct a lost cultural tradition from genetic material. This means conservation efforts must focus on maintaining viable population sizes, ensuring that there are always enough individuals and particularly enough experienced adults to maintain the cultural transmission of essential knowledge. It means protecting the habitat not just for genetic populations, but for cultural populations, recognizing that different groups have different needs based on their cultural traditions and learned behavior. The social bonds and emotional lives of killer whales also carry implications for conservation and management. Breaking up families, whether through capture for display in marine parks or through deaths caused by human activities, inflicts emotional trauma on these animals. We've seen how deeply orcas can grieve. We know they maintain lifelong bonds with family members. Actions that sever these bonds cause genuine suffering. This recognition has led to increasing ethical concerns about keeping killer whales in captivity, particularly in situations where their social and cognitive needs cannot be adequately met. An animal with a brain adapted for processing vast amounts of acoustic information in a complex three-dimensional ocean environment, an animal whose intelligence manifests through long-distance travel, sophisticated hunting, and rich social interaction across a large pod network, cannot have these needs met in a concrete tank. The ethical problems with captivity become more acute as our understanding of orca intelligence deepens. The cognitive sophistication of killer whales also means we should expect them to respond to conservation efforts in complex ways. They're not simple animals that will automatically recover if we just provide enough food and space. They're cultural beings whose responses to changing circumstances depend on their accumulated knowledge, their social structures, and their ability to innovate. Conservation strategies must account for this complexity, recognizing that different populations may require different approaches based on their unique cultural traditions and ecological context. For example, protecting salmon populations is crucial for resident killer whales that have cultural traditions centered on salmon hunting. But simply increasing salmon abundance might not be sufficient if the whales' hunting grounds are too noisy to hunt effectively, if boat traffic disrupts their foraging, or if contaminants have accumulated in the prey or the whales themselves to levels that impact health and reproduction. Effective conservation requires addressing multiple stressors simultaneously, recognizing the complex interplay between food availability, habitat quality, acoustic environment, social structure, and cultural tradition. The long-term nature of killer whale learning and the extended investment in teaching young also has conservation implications. When populations decline, when adults die prematurely, when social structures are disrupted, the impacts extend beyond immediate survival to long-term cultural transmission. Young whales that don't receive adequate teaching may never fully master essential hunting technique. Knowledge can be lost or degraded over time if transmission is disrupted. Rebuilding a depleted population isn't just about increasing numbers, it's also about maintaining the cultural integrity that makes a killer whale population viable. Public understanding of killer whale intelligence is crucial for generating support for conservation measures. When people recognize that these aren't just animals but intelligent, emotional beings with rich social lives and complex cultures, they're more likely to support efforts to protect them. Education about orca cognition, about what we've learned about their sophisticated abilities, can build empathy and understanding that translates into public pressure for stronger protections, better regulations, and more ambitious conservation programs. As you settle into sleep, reflect on what we owe to these remarkable creatures. They didn't ask to share their ocean with us. They've been hunting, communicating, teaching, and living their complex social lives for millennia before humans ever set sail. Now our activities impact them profoundly, from the noise we produce to the prey we deplete, to the pollutants we release. Recognizing their intelligence, their emotional depth, their cultural richness, we have a responsibility to change how we interact with their world, to minimize our impacts, to protect not just their physical survival but the knowledge, traditions and social bonds that make them who they are. We've journeyed together through the remarkable world of killer whale intelligence, exploring the sophisticated brains that enable their cognitive prowess, the cultural traditions that define their populations, the hunting strategies that demonstrate their creativity and cooperation, the teaching methods that transmit knowledge across generations, the sensory mastery that allows them to perceive their world through sound, the emotional depth that shapes their social bonds, and the problem-solving abilities that reveal true cognitive flexibility. What emerges from this exploration is a picture of intelligence that challenges our assumptions about what minds can. Killer whales have achieved cognitive sophistication through an evolutionary path entirely independent from our own, proving that advanced intelligence isn't a uniquely human trait but a capability that can arise wherever conditions favor it. As you drift into peaceful sleep, carry with you the knowledge that the oceans are home to minds as complex and rich as our own, just expressed in different form. Tomorrow when you wake, perhaps you'll see the world a bit differently, recognizing that intelligence and consciousness aren't limited to creatures like us, but are distributed across the tree of life in magnificent and surprising ways. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as a calm ocean under starlight. If you enjoyed this journey into the science of killer whale intelligence, please like this video and subscribe to Science Lullaby for more explorations of the natural world designed to educate and soothe. Until next time, sleep well.